Welcome, everybody, to the opening session, our showcase of the Revolutionary City. This is the first of several panels of part of our conference, The Meanings of Independence. My name is Patrick Spiro, and I'm the librarian at the American Philosophical Society. And again, I just want to welcome everybody in person and also online. This is the first conference we've held in almost probably 2 years. So we are dusting off some rust. We're learning about doing new things like social distancing and having a hybrid audience. And so everybody that's tuning in right now, I want you to know that we can hear you, to ask questions. We are going to make sure that we take some questions from that online audience, and we think we have a system in place to do that. So before we get started, we really look forward to the day and a half of conversations we're going to have about the meaning of independence in the 21st century, especially with an eye towards 2026. But before we get there, I just want to introduce everybody to the American Philosophical Society, because I see a lot of familiar faces in the audience, but also some new ones. So if you're not familiar with the American Philosophical Society, we were founded by Benjamin Franklin in 1743 with the idea that there needed to be an institution in the British colonies that would bring together the leading thinkers to share what they were learning with each other and to share it with the rest of the world. And in Franklin's proposal that he published, calling people together, he outlined 4 things that the APS would do to advance knowledge. The first was to elect members, distinguished for their contributions to the advancement of knowledge. The second was to hold regular meetings where these members could convene, share what they're learning with each other. The third was a publications program to disseminate this knowledge to the wider world. And finally, what I think might have been the most innovative part of Franklin's proposal was a research program. The members' dues were going to go to support young scholars in the colonies conducting field research. Today, over 275 years later, the Society still supports those original programs. We have over 850 elected members in the United States, over 100 Nobel laureates, Pulitzer Prize winners, Academy Award winners, and a whole bunch in between. We still hold regular meetings of members that showcase cutting-edge research in all different disciplines. We have the longest continuously operating publications program in North America. We give out over $1.5 million of research grants a year, primarily to young scholars conducting cutting-edge research in the field. And now, over time, we've also developed a library and museum. The library began as a way to collect the correspondence of members, and it's now grown to house over 14 million pages of manuscripts, over 275,000 books, and we offer a whole range of programs and fellowships. And in the 21st century, we also opened a museum to showcase these treasures and to connect with a wider public. And that museum now receives over 100,000 visitors a year. So I encourage everybody to check out online who we are, what we do, and what we may be able to offer you in terms of research assistance. I also want to acknowledge that the APS's full name is the American Philosophical Society, held at Philadelphia for promoting useful knowledge. And I think it's important to recognize that what we now call Philadelphia is the historic and ancestral homeland of the Lenape people, known as Lenape-Hoking. And the Society expresses its sincere thanks for the past and ongoing generosity of the Lenape, as well as that of numerous other indigenous communities and individuals throughout this continent who have offered guidance, expertise, and opportunities for collaboration. So now let's get on to the program itself. And I want to go over some conference logistics. The first is that we're live streaming this conference. To do so, you can check out our website, amphilsoc.org. We have a Twitter hashtag, that's APS Meetings 2021. We're taking questions in person, but also online. So please, if you're online, feel free to ask questions either on Facebook Live or through our website. And you can connect with us at our Twitter, hashtag, Instagram, and Facebook. The conference itself begins today with the Revolutionary City Showcase. We'll then have an opening keynote at 6 p.m. There's going to be a reception immediately following this panel. And then Friday, we have 4 panels along with a closing keynote that's going to feature Alan Taylor and Mary Beth Norton, Reflections on the Past, Ideas for the Future. So I look forward to seeing all of you in the days to come and everybody online to continue to tune in. So with that, I want to turn things over to Kyle Roberts, who has been spearheading one of the Society's signal contributions to 2026, we believe, will be. It's called the Revolutionary City, a portal to the nation's past. What this portal will do is connect the manuscript and printed material from the American Philosophical Society, from the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, and from the Library Company of Philadelphia together in one digital repository to break down these institutional barriers and provide 24/7-hour access to researchers in any part of the world who want to explore the history of the revolution in Philadelphia. And what's, I think, particularly exciting about it is we're building this portal to be scalable so that other archives, small archives, large archives, who have material that would be useful for this portal will be able to contribute to it over time. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Kyle.
Great. Good afternoon. My name is Kyle Roberts. I'm the Associate Director of Library and Museum Programming at the American Philosophical Society. My colleague Adriana Link, who is up there in the back row, and I have been the face of Zoom for about 2 years, and it's really nice to see live human faces here today, so thank you so much. The American Philosophical Society resides in Lenape-Hoking, the homeland of the Lenape people, whose relationships and connections with the land continue to this day and into the future. The Society expresses its sincere thanks for the past and ongoing generosity of the Lenape, as well as that of numerous other indigenous communities and individuals throughout the continent who have offered guidance, expertise, and opportunities for collaborations that really have made the work of the Society's library and museum possible. It was last year at this time that the American Philosophical Society learned it had been awarded a National Leadership Grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, the IMLS, to work with the Library Company of Philadelphia and the Historical Society of Pennsylvania to create a shared online portal of digitized archival materials related to the American Revolution. The point of this portal was really to break down institutional barriers between these archives, allowing users to discover stories that had previously been obscured by the physical separation of collections. And as you all know, these are very old institutions, so these are collections that have been separated for centuries. Both the APS and LCP, founded by Ben Franklin, and the HSP, founded to celebrate the memory of the Revolution, hold large and invaluable collections related to the American Revolution and the early national period. But whereas the stories of the founders, like Washington and Jefferson, hidden behind our screen right now, but you'll see later, are well known, the scattered nature of records of lesser known actors has made their lives less accessible to wide audiences. So what we're trying to do in Revolutionary City is to remedy that, both by bringing scattered collections together, but also by surfacing long forgotten stories. A year later, this is the last month of the IMLS grant. We are very happy to share with you the outcomes of our effort. I'm also very happy to announce that Revolutionary City Project has received a very generous grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities, sustaining the humanities through the American Rescue Plan. This grant will fund a year of digitization at the Library Company, at APS, and at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania. We were going to go starting January 1st, and we're going to start digitizing everything we can find created in or received in Philadelphia between 1774 and 1783. A note about our current technical difficulties. We're having some network connectivity right now, so those of you who might be trying to get on our Wi-Fi, you'll note that you can't. So please use your cellular Wi-Fi. You'll also note that you can't access Revolutionary City. We hope to have it back up next week. In the meanwhile, grab a sticker, and it's got the URL on there. You will get to see, though, the site through our presentation today. So we're going to begin with an overview presentation by Sabrina Bocanegra, who is the IMLS Project Data Manager on the portal. It's going to be followed by a conversation with 4 of the stakeholders talking about their experience working on this project, and then we're going to conclude with plenty of time for questions with our in-person and our online audience. So Sabrina, maybe if I could ask you to come up. Sabrina got her start in archives as a volunteer at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania and got her MSLIS from Drexel University. Recently, she worked with the Drexel University College of Medicine Legacy Center as a project archivist for 2 great Philadelphia Area Consortium of Special Collection Libraries, or PACSCL, projects in her own right and for the health of the nation. Now, Sabrina began as the project data manager for the IMLS grant on November 1st, 2020, and I am so excited to share with you that on November 1st, 2021, she will transition into a full-time position at the APS as a digitization archivist, a brand new position for us here at the APS. And in that work, she's going to continue to supervise the development of Revolutionary City in anticipation of 2026. Sabrina?
Thank you. Thank you, Kyle, and hello, everyone. I'm going to jump right in because I've got a lot to cover in just 15 minutes. So, as Kyle mentioned, over the past 11 months, under an IMLS National Leadership Grant, we've been working to design a public, shared digital repository where scholars, teachers, students, and the general public can learn about the diverse stories of the American Revolution from the perspective of residents of America's revolutionary city, Philadelphia. Overall, the project aims to digitize all of the surviving manuscript materials created or received in Philadelphia during the period of the American Revolution. So our scope right now is between May 1774 and September 1783. And we're beginning with the collections of the American Philosophical Society, the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, and the Library Company of Philadelphia. And here you can see a beautiful screenshot of our updated homepage. You'll get to see a little bit more of it later, though it'll be a little bit of an older version. The project is really driven by three primary objectives that we've kept in mind over this past year. So the first, to engage a stakeholder committee to identify missing and overlooked narratives of the revolution. The second, to review existing metadata, proposed metadata standards designed to make accessible a broader range of voices. And the third is to design the actual digital portal, which will serve as a platform for discovery, contextualization, and education about the American Revolution. So two core challenges in this project are really to break down institutional barriers that impede access to material that many people find inaccessible and hard to use, while also recovering those voices of the underrepresented communities of the revolution. So tackling the organization of the physical archive was really the first step in this process of breaking down barriers. So why is this a challenge? The varying cataloging resources, digitization, and access policies of each institution has really meant that these archives are often remain dispersed and difficult to be reconstituted in their whole, especially when you consider papers of a single family or a person are spread out through different institutions. The second challenge here is that the voices of the non-elite are often obscured within these collections due to how they've traditionally been cataloged. So for this period, archival collections tend to be focused and arranged around elite white men connected with these papers, often subordinating those voices of women, African Americans, loyalists, and Native Americans contained within. So you can see from this visual, out of the 100 or so collections proposed for the project, a little over 50% of the collections are centered around a white male figure. And the stories of underrepresented narratives I just mentioned, exist throughout the record and within these papers of the white male figures, but accessing them can be difficult for those without the resources or training to know how to find them. So this is especially true in collections that are minimally processed. So really, the question throughout this pilot has been, how do we go about uniting these collections and recovering the voices and stories using this portal? So we took a simple approach in theory, as you can see. We looked at how transforming the existing metadata from each institution, working from a finding aid or collection guide, and also, the primary sources that have already been uploaded into our institution's digital libraries, and work to enhance fields like title, description, and subjects. So here on top, we have existing metadata from a collection, and then on the bottom there, that same data just formatted and enhanced according to our project standards. And you'll see an example of that a little later and what that looks like in the portal. But doing this work, it takes time, resources, of course, but it's not something that we at the APS or our partners at other institutions haven't done before. So besides our team doing the usual background work of exploring existing guidelines, workflows, and technologies, we did something that we never do in these types of projects. So right from the start, we engaged a fantastic team of 16 educators, public history professionals, scholars, and digital humanists in bi-monthly discussions about the needs and opportunities involved in making historic materials not only available, but also usable to the broader public. So engaging our diverse team of stakeholders and incorporating their feedback at every step has been so essential throughout this project, especially in the work of recovering hidden voices of the revolution, as you can see from the slide, and also giving a voice to the end user. So for example, we were able to benefit from the stakeholder team's expertise and experience by asking them to create metadata for a couple of the primary sources included in our pilot. So during this exercise, stakeholders were able to engage with the sources in a different way than they normally would. And it worked out wonderfully for us because they provided their own perspectives on the research value, access points, and larger themes, and ultimately producing meaningful and useful metadata for the primary source's digital surrogates. So here's an example of a primary source that had been previously uploaded into the digital repository of the Historical Society of Pennsylvania. Pretty standard metadata, title, description, some subjects. So our team of stakeholders got this letter book without any metadata and were asked to create their own metadata, focusing on subjects, themes, and enhancing the description. And this is what they came up with. So a lot going on here, but it was honestly great to see the different topics and keywords the stakeholders gave to this primary source. You really start to see how a particular object can mean different things to different users depending on what your background is or the motives driving your research or interests. So using this information, I was able to pull out appropriate keywords, phrases, and concepts and turn them into authoritative subjects that could be associated with this item and create a fuller description that could be uploaded into the portal, which you will see here. So this is that same letter book in our Revolutionary City portal. Here's the viewer and the enhanced metadata that is associated with it currently. So in this pilot phase, we focused our efforts on subject headings and keywords that would uncover the underrepresented voices and stories of the revolution, and also build on our project guidelines and planning for scalability and application beyond this pilot phase. But we built a portal from the ground up. As you can see here, this is what we started with, very out-of-the-box website. And in each stage, in the process, like gathering ideas or suggestions for the design and functionality, stakeholders were there to give us feedback, even at times when we were very hesitant to show our very beta product. And after every meeting, the project team regrouped. We went over the feedback and takeaways from our discussions with the stakeholders. And you can read some here, but just to give an example of how we put this into action, the third point about the importance of having an easy and clear way to find content or to lead users to that primary source. We thought about our navigation headings like resources, collections, lesson plans, finding recognizable buzzwords that will get a user to where they want to be and what they want to find is really important. So avoiding jargon is usually the best way to avoid overwhelming users, but also not overwhelming them with a very cluttered page. Stakeholders really liked clean and white. So as we look to the future of the portal, as you can see here, these uncovered voices and stories of the revolution in Philadelphia will begin to appear under larger themes and will be supplemented with contextual materials such as essays and primary source sets, so they'll be easier for your users to navigate and understand. We also plan to provide a lot of different resources, the first honestly being the essays from our stakeholders reflecting on the project and their experience building this portal with us and what it has meant to their audience and to them. To end this out, I just want to point out that we couldn't have gotten this far without, or this far with the enhanced metadata, with themes, the design and functionality of the portal without the voice of our stakeholders. A large part of the project is to recover the voices of marginalized communities. This is something that we knew, but as we started the process, we realized that we were also in the process of adding other voices that are usually spoken of but rarely consulted, and that is that of the end user. So we always develop projects with the user in mind, saying, the user wants this, the community wants this, but rarely have we reached out and engaged communities in a sustained dialogue about what they would actually want out of a digital portal. This project really afforded us the opportunity and time to actually assemble a diverse community of stakeholders who would be active members of the project team from the very beginning. And I want to thank them all for their time and their valuable input. So, congrats to them. And before I leave the podium, I would like to give you a sneak peek at the product of our labor. So if you could help me, I think. Actually, maybe I can do it on my own. Ah, perfect. Doing a great job. Pump myself up. So here is a little video walkthrough. Actually, before I play that, this is how the portal looked about a month ago. As Kyle mentioned, our server network is down right now, but I strongly encourage everyone to visit our site next week and poke around. There are a lot of newly digitized collections available on the portal from the Historical Society of Pennsylvania and the Library Company of Philadelphia that were only previously available on site. And every month or week from now until 2026, there will be newly digitized content. So now I can start this. So as I play this video, I'm just going to explain some of the features that you'll see on the site next week. There's a search engine, a simple search at the top there. Underneath here, we have our blocks with the main points of interest that we have came up with so far. Of course, these are subject to change at any point, and they'll click out to these different pages. At the top navigation bar, you have a couple different headings about, theme, browse, education. Right now, theme and browse are the only ones with a drop-down, and you can see here that subjects, people, and locations are going to be able to be browsed. And you can see from here, sorry, this is going like a little crazy right now. I think I can speed it up to talk a little bit about, well, so I can just say that all of these subjects and subjects, people, and locations are Library of Congress headings. So, and you can see on the side of each heading, there is, a number. So that's just the number that means that how many collections or how many objects contain that subject. So you can actually click on them and go through, and it'll bring you to a results page like this, and you can see all of the objects that contain that subject, but also on the side here, we have filters that you can filter by. So many ways to sort this item. Here I do a simple search of women, and so I'll show sort by title and by date, and then on the left-hand side, you'll see different filters for people, institution, collection, genre, date, and language. Move forward a little bit here so that we can get into an actual object. Here we go. So when you click on a document, it brings you to the documents page, which we call the digital object page, and you can see the title and the document and the viewer, in the viewer showing the scanned image. And there's a bunch of different ways to look at the scanned image, which you can see here just by clicking through, or you can actually view the pages. And when clicking on one of those pages, you'll have a better view of the scanned image and really zooming in and zooming out and rotating, which is really nice for these 18th century documents all written in cursive. So at the bottom here, we have the metadata associated with each item, providing some context and access points to the document, and a lot of controlled words that are linked out. So once you click on those, you'll be able to see what other objects contain that data. And I'm going to stop this here on the home page. Oops, I'm doing crazy things. And that's all I have. So like I said, I really encourage you to see visit the website next week when it is up and kind of play around with it. There's a couple different options that you can click around and see the stakeholder essays and more about the project and what we've been doing these past 12 months. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sabrina. So as Sabrina said, we had the opportunity to work with 16 stakeholders, 4 of whom graciously volunteered to come up and join us on stage. This is actually a kind of special moment because they've not met each other in person. They've only met each other on Zoom. So thank you so much for coming. I'll just sort of introduce them in order. Benjamin Bankhurst is Assistant Professor of History at Shepherd University, a public liberal arts college in the eastern panhandle of West Virginia. His research focuses on migration to the Appalachian frontier in the colonial and revolutionary periods, the Irish Atlantic world, and loyalism in the greater Shenandoah Valley. Down here next to Sabrina is Kevin Casey, who is in his 22nd year as teacher of history, U.S. history at Pittman High School. He was awarded a James Madison Fellowship and spent time as a fellow at Washington Library in Mount Vernon, where his research focused on the presidential mansion in Philadelphia. Between Kevin and Ben is Celia Coast-Ellenbogen, an archivist at the Friends Historical Library of Swarthmore College and vice chair of the Philadelphia Area Consortium of Special Collections Libraries, or PACSCL. And then on the end, fresh from the airport, thank you so much for being here, Patricia, is an 8th grade social studies teacher from South Texas, an area commonly known as the Rio Grande Valley. Patricia teaches in a small rural district on a campus of about 250 students. So I want to thank you all for being here. I'm thinking in the spirit of social distancing, maybe I should just stay over here so that I'm not crowding all of you. No, that's not for you to move. You're all fine. So we have met as a group online 7 times over the past year. We did these on Thursdays at 5 p.m., which was very generous of you all to put off the dinner hour so that we could get together. And we began with discussions about the stories that we currently tell about the American Revolution in Philadelphia, and then started to think about the stories that we want to tell but that we can't. We dove into the importance of meaningful metadata, led by Sabrina and our colleague Byard Miller, who's not with us today, and thought about how we could design a digital portal for all different types of users. We reviewed and offered feedback on versions of the portal as it was developed, and it has developed, I think, a lot over the months from that blank page that Sabrina first started with. And then we finally thought about what types of contextual materials should be included on the site to improve learning opportunities, really thinking kind of the long game. Now, I invite our stakeholders, as you sort of think back on those 7 months, are there particular stages in the process that were meaningful or memorable to you? Are there ones that kind of really stand out?
I guess I'll get us started here. So I think for me, as a teacher at the high school level, it was just sort of an inspirational thing to be a part of a group like this with so many people of varied backgrounds sharing that same passion, and being able to come together in an environment like this and share our passions for not only the history and the time, but also the area of Philadelphia. And for me, that was a big takeaway, I think, was just that ability to be with others and be a part of that, I think, was impactful for me.
So I'm an archivist, and I am involved in creating websites similar to this one, but I also do teaching at my institution, and I work with classes. And for me, far and away, my favorite session that we had was the one where we were invited to bring an example of a digital project that we either loved or found challenging, and to talk through the features that we liked and the features that we didn't like. And I loved it for 2 reasons. I loved it partly because it was very informative for me as someone who works on sites like this to be like, oh, actually people like when we do that, or people don't care about the bells and whistles, people really want to get to the content, all of those kinds of questions. But also because it's such a varied group of people on the stakeholder committee. And so people were bringing a really wide variety of projects, and there was just so much cool stuff, sites that I hadn't been to before and was really excited to discover. So that was definitely my favorite week. Oh, also seeing Sabrina's beautiful spreadsheets. Have to compliment you there.
Well, I guess the weeks that really stick out for me would be the early stages when we were dealing with trying to reconcile the metadata from all the different archives. And it just really kind of put what Celia does and Sabrina as well into the content and into broader context. And sort of moving on from that discussion, we then started talking about thematic access points as a way of getting around some of this jungle of metadata. And I thought that was just hearing the perspectives from my colleagues on within the stakeholder sort of group was just eye-opening. And what I found really exciting is that people really thinking about audience. I mean, I think every one of the stakeholders came into this understanding that they were representing different constituencies, and really, I think, did surface to those constituencies when we did try to sort of break up these themes. So.
My favorite part as a U.S. history teacher for middle school is that we look at a lot of primary sources in my classes because it is required. But I also like the kids to see, the conversations that were going on back in history, and to be able to analyze them. So there was one time where we were given several different primary sources that we had to read and then pull information from to be able to build what we just saw there, the different themes, the different things that are connecting these documents. So for me, that was one of the most favorite parts. It was just being able to see those documents, firsthand, well, virtually, but being able to actually interact with them. And I even got to show my students, I'm like, look at what I'm doing as an adult. Like, this is what I expect you all to be able to do eventually. So it was a really impactful part for me.
That's great. Thank you all so much. Sabrina, I'm going to put you on the spot. What's it like working with our stakeholders? You should say positive things, of course. But more, I'm sort of interested, have you in your other projects worked in this mode before? And maybe what have you felt like you've learned by sharing some authority as a sort of gatekeeper to these materials?
Well, just to answer one question, this is the first time I've ever been able to work with stakeholders on a project like this. I'll say it's been a really big learning experience and a great learning experience. Trying to navigate everyone's feedback and incorporate it into a project is a process. Realizing that no matter how clear you think you're being or the end user might not always be there technologically. So that was really interesting for us to, take a step back. I mean, mostly Byard and I, saying like, okay, how do we make this more clear? How do we evaluate this? What are the different approaches we can take for the certain aspects of the process? Many of the stakeholders, besides Celia, don't do this every day, and our egos really do need to be checked at the door and be like, hey, like these people, not these people, our stakeholders, our stakeholders are not at the same level as us, but it made it so much better for us to be able to explain things and make sense to a group. So that they could better contribute their expertise and help define the scope of the project. I think that's all I have to say.
That's great. So a central part of this process has been thinking about how to design a site that will actually be used by a broad community of learners. And I'd like to put our stakeholders on the spot and just say a few things. What do you think are some of the things that libraries like the APS and LCP and HSP can learn and should really keep in mind when designing digital projects for the communities of learners that you work with?
So I guess I'll start here. And I come at it from the standpoint of how will it most benefit my 10th grade students? So how will 15 and 16-year-olds be able to access it? So that's my first point at which I will attack it. And then secondly, as an educator myself, not necessarily within the scholarly realm, but as an educator myself, how open is that gate for me to be useful and be able to use it as well? So those are the two approaches that I had. And, what I'm looking for constantly as an educator is that sort of aha moment, when you can really connect the history to the students in a way where you've got them. And I teach just across the bridge in Pittman, New Jersey, so when we're not involved in a pandemic, I can normally bring them over here, and we take a walking tour at the conclusion of our unit on the Constitution and we see the different areas. And when we walk through the arch that Benjamin Franklin walked through, there's that aha moment, right, where I can say you're walking in the same footsteps. So from the standpoint of this this portal, I'm looking for the same things as well. You know, what can I do that the kids will easily be able to access these primary source documents and then use them in a way that will provide that moment for them. And sometimes it's more challenging than others, but, and I think that's one of the things that we were able to bridge is not only the access for the students, but the access for me as an educator as well. So that's what I was kind of approaching it as.
So for myself as an archivist, there's usefulness for my audience, but there's also usefulness selfishly for myself. And so one of the questions that's always on my mind is, what is this digital access point providing that isn't already available in the finding aid, in the paper finding aid, or in the digital finding aid? And so having this enhanced metadata that is detailed, it's item level, it's not just sometimes, you know, using Library of Congress, but also sometimes going outside of Library of Congress to choose more descriptive terms, having transcripts, all of these things that help a user find, you know, if they're interested in recipes, they can find it in the Farmer Journal, and being able to find it there, even though it's not listed on the finding aid. And then, of course, having an accurate citation so that when someone comes in and says, I found this online and now I'd like to see it and touch it and smell it, that I can actually find it in my archives, very important.
Yeah, I think this is one of the tricky questions. I think you know, one thing I would hope that, and I think Sabrina and the team have done very well, is for them to consider the presentation of this material, especially through thematic searches. So, I mean, we saw that wonderful slide about kind of the hierarchy within the archive and how these archives have been organized over time, and given their differences in collection patterns and whatnot, you do find that hierarchy replicated, I think, among the three archives. And so, you know, if I have a student who's interested in, say, slavery as a topic, and they search the thematic essay, or they access it through the thematic essay, they're presented with a wide variety of sources. But how do they make sense of those sources? I think they're used to thinking about letters. They're used to thinking about sort of, I guess, biographical resources when dealing with that subject in terms of research papers. But now I mean, one of the beauties of this project is they're going to have just an endless number of amounts of different types of material. And how are they going to make sense of that? I mean, how are they going to jump from an auction record perhaps to a letter that mentions enslavement to, you know, I mean, so I think the latter discussions that we had about how to present types of material within the thematic essays, I think that was really exciting. But I think just knowing that many of our students won't know how, really, at first, to interpret a lot of the material that they're going to be looking at, especially when it comes to recovering the lives of people outside of sort of the elite, for lack of a better word. So, great, thanks.
For me, I think organizations like the APS and other organizations that create portals like this, the ease of anybody being able to find what they're looking for, which is why it was very important to have those subjects, divided by person, by place, by even event, because there is so much out there, and especially for middle school, our students are not exposed to a lot. And in 8th grade, that's the first time that they see that people did write letters to each other back then, because they're so used to technology and it being extremely quickly. And I'll have them look at the dates and say, okay, look how long it took for this letter to be replied to. You know, and they even mention in the letter, you know, I wrote back to you in March and it's already October and I haven't heard from you. And I tell the kids, you know, these are things we're looking for, that you need to understand that times have changed, and for them to be able to look for different subjects and look for specifically like those dates is really important for them to make that connection to today and see how far we've come as a country in technology and things like that. But just like the ease of just being able to search for something specifically like recipes is something that's very important when it comes to these types of portals.
So, Celia, you're on the main line. Kevin, you're over the bridge. But Ben, you're in West Virginia, and Patricia, you're in Texas. Does the Revolutionary City have relevance for your students further on? How do you sort of make that, what can this portal do nationally beyond just maybe locally and regionally?
Well, like for me in Texas, middle school, 8th grade, we do take a state test. They are required to take a test, and we have different objectives that they have to be able to master. And several of them do target Philadelphia specifically, areas of Pennsylvania and then Philadelphia, because there's so much history here. So I do try to bring as much as I can into the classroom that deals with this city, because it really was the starting point for a lot of things that continue today. So actually right now in my classes, we're going over the Constitution, and there's no other city than Philadelphia to actually go over that. So when I let them know that I was coming over here, they were very excited. They're like, take pictures, take tons of pictures, bring us stuff. So like they're seeing that connection. And then I've been letting them know the last few months, I'm part of this project, and I'm gonna have the opportunity to go to Philadelphia. So like it's becoming a real place to them. Because for them, it's just, they read about it in the paper and, in the book, and not many of the kids have the opportunity to come over here. Not many have the opportunity to leave what we call the valley, which is the southern part of Texas. So for them to make the connection, like, wow, my teacher's actually going to the place that we just read about, is really impactful for them. And I already know I'm gonna get tons of questions once I get home about how is it over there? Because I think out of all my 70-something 8th graders, only one has ever made it to Philadelphia because their parent lives here. So like being able to come over here and then make that connection, I think they're gonna pay a lot more attention to what we go over in the future in our classroom dealing with the city. Because like it really is a revolutionary city. So I think this portal, next week, once I'm able to show it to them, with everything lined up, it's gonna be really fun to just let them go and just explore. Like, just take a class period and just go and see what can you find. What's the most interesting letter you can find or document. So I think it really is gonna make a really strong connection for my students with the city.
I'll just say that I'm always amazed every year at how close we are to Philadelphia and how few of my students have actually been into the historic district, have actually seen Independence Hall. And so to some extent, even though I am so close, it's still an important thing to bring that connection to the students because they haven't been to Philadelphia. So I think that's always a shock to me and I think part of that's just the relative closeness to the city. Sometimes we don't explore what's right in our backyards, but we go out elsewhere and find those things. So, I think regardless of whether you're in southern Texas or just across the bridge, I think that one, it's the ability to bring you closer together, and then two, because we are focusing on some of these untold stories, it's the ability for kids who might not have otherwise have had the ability to see themselves and can now find their own identity within some of these stories of the lesser known or the lesser talked about people. So I think that's also an important concept as well.
So I work at Swarthmore. I work in the Friends Historical Library. It's a Quaker archives. So we don't love telling history through the lens of there was a war and then there was another war and then there was another war and we're just going to talk about all the wars. So one of the things that I appreciate about this project, because it strives to kind of comprehensively talk about the time period. I think a lot of discourse about the American Revolution does focus on like the war. And this project, because it's trying to document everything, is talking about these smaller experiences and everyday life and these other aspects of living through this era and living through this time period that aren't just about the violence.
Great. I think I guess following on from what Patricia was saying, I think the centrality of Philadelphia to the narrative of the American Revolution as a point of connection. I mean, with students who they have a broad sketch of I guess the revolution that they've kind of developed over time, and Philadelphia plays a pretty big role. So that's a point of connection. Also, I think from the context of an undergraduate classroom, the ability to unleash the students on topics related to the Constitution when we're talking about it, and other events within Philadelphia is invaluable. For my students as well, it's and this was one of the issues that was brought up over the course of the stakeholder meetings, is that Philadelphia is it is a world in of itself, but it's not it's a world with permeable borders, right? So for the perspective of my students in the eastern panhandle of West Virginia, the Shenandoah Valley, there's still points of connection to Philadelphia. I mean, many of the research papers that I've overseen recently have oddly had sort of Philadelphia connection. One student who was looking into Quaker history was very interested in the Quaker exiles in Winchester. Migration's a perennial favorite, and of course, migration down the valley from Philadelphia. So there's this enables sort of our students to, I think, locate their region within a larger national context, even though we are focusing on Philadelphia. So I guess that would be my answer. Yeah.
That's great. So now I'd like to turn it to our in-person and online audiences for questions. So Adriana, why don't you just wave when there's a question for us to pose? I'm hoping I'm not going to do a feedback thing, so I'm going to come down into the audience. If somebody has a question, go ahead and raise your hand. We'll have about 10 minutes or so, 15 minutes for questions. And out of our attempts at social distancing, I'll hold the microphone just so you don't have to get too close to it.
Thanks very much, and thanks for this great work. It looks like an amazing archive. I'm going to ask a two-part question because the parts are sort of in opposite directions, but they connect in the middle. One of which is, obviously, across the nation, there are collections of Philadelphia-related materials that have traveled with families as manifest destiny happened to them. So my question is there going to be some attempt to collect those materials and make them part of the portal as well? And the other end of that is during the bicentennial, a lot of small historical societies get started. And I don't know how it is in Philadelphia, but in Massachusetts, certainly a lot of towns hold a lot of original material that we see as the undiscovered mine for underrepresented voices in particular. And is there a way that you're going to help work with some of these smaller societies and help them, learn about digitization, teach them, provide support for their efforts?
Great question. Sabrina, do you want to lead us off on that?
Yeah, so I think I kind of mentioned in my presentation that right now our scope is Philadelphia created and received between certain dates, but eventually, like in this pilot, we are building on our guidelines and our workflows to eventually include anyone that has, documents and materials related to Philadelphia for 2026. And then beyond that, I'm not assuming, I know that Patrick is, that's the goal, to make this website, the place to learn about the American Revolution. So a part of that is, for your second question, building, like I said, our workflows to figure out, okay, what metadata standards are we going to have for this project? What are the other standards that we need that we can kind of branch out to different repositories and societies for the 2026 and beyond?
Maybe I could put Celia on the spot. I mean, who has materials in her collection that would likely be very apt for us? What would you need from us in order to make that jump?
Some monies would be really cool. No, I mean, I think we would be certainly thrilled to collaborate, and we've got lots of, and I think you were pointing out earlier, one of the great things about this project is Philadelphia families are really interconnected, And the archival collections in Philadelphia repositories are just a spider's web of interlinking, and it would be really amazing to be able to kind of complete these stories, see both sides of a correspondence. You know, I saw Pemberton on the list. We got Pembertons. It's a Quaker archives. We got lots of stuff. And I think that would be really great. And I'll say, you mentioned you're from Massachusetts. In the Philadelphia area, we have laid a lot of groundwork for working with small institutions. I personally, before I worked at Swarthmore, worked on a project that was based at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania called the Hidden Collections Initiative for Pennsylvania Small Archival Repositories. So we went out and surveyed collections, over 100 neighborhood historical societies, historic sites, small museums, and that kind of thing. So off the top of my head, I can only think of like 1 or 2 places that I know have relevant stuff. We haven't talked about this yet, but the Delaware County Institute of Science has like a quartermaster's book from the Revolutionary Era Valley Forge. That one's on my mind. So I see Sabrina writing notes. So yeah, I mean, that's a great suggestion. And I don't work at APS, but I would support that.
There's about 110,000 pages as we count at APS, LCP, and HSP. And Sabrina has been doing the really hard job of crunching all of that and figuring out how quickly we can do it without sacrificing the quality of the metadata. We're hoping, right, end of 2022, 3-ish, yeah. And then one of the commitments that the APS has made is to providing hosting for these sites indefinitely. So for institutions that might not have their own digital library, it will always be in our site, also, always accessible that way. So we're hoping that, because we can afford to do that sort of upkeep, is also a lure. And, I want to point out that we have one of the guests here who's reached out about private collections, as something to think about down the road. There's, of course, issues there with rights permissions that we would have to work through. But I think it's really exciting to think about where we might end up. I see another question back here. Then I'll come back around.
And then Kyle, we have a question from the online audience as well.
Wonderful. Good evening. My question has to do with, with the recent, and this is really for the teachers, with the recent attack on covering and talking about certain issues, especially when we're talking about the Revolutionary War and all the debates that were happening at the time. How, and this is for Sabrina, how is the Revolutionary City going to lean into it to highlight certain things that are part of the ongoing debate about its significance, historical significance, and also the reality of the context that existed on the ground in Philadelphia, but also the debates largely around loyalists and patriots and everything like that. So I know that's like a large question, but especially West Virginia and Texas, especially Texas, how are you dealing with all this?
I know that our state government is trying to pass several laws that limit it does limit what we're able to teach, especially for 8th grade, because we do cover that major section of history that deals with all those issues that are coming up. As of right now, from our education agency, for me, I haven't received anything specific about which objectives to kind of avoid, but I know that there's been a lot of conversation of teaching like both sides of certain events or certain situations that really, I know for me, I've been teaching 8th grade history for about, I would say about 7 years now, and it's difficult it's very hard to try to see it from both sides of the story. But if those laws really do go through and they do start getting enforced, then we're really going to have no choice, because I know that they're really cracking down on things like that. But in my classroom, anytime that I present anything that has two sides to a story, I start off the year with it's something from the Stanford I can't think of the website right now, but it's called a lunchroom fight, where the students get a situation where there's two students that fought, and they have to get primary sources, they have to get, witnesses, things like that. And I tell them, like, there is two sides to a story, so whenever I present anything in the classroom, I always present it as non-biased. And even with, like, political parties, things like that, and we don't cover current events in my class, but whenever the students do ask, I do spend a few minutes on it. Because they'll ask me, what's going on with this, especially when it was during the election year, because they don't understand political parties at this age as much as they believe that they do because of whatever they hear from outside or from the internet. I try not to guide them in any way. I don't show my personal political views. It's just very bipartisan. And I made it very clear. I'm like, this is what this side, is really believes in, and this is what this side believes in. And I tell them, when you're adults, you have to make that decision. And I bring it back to history. You need to learn this history, because then otherwise you won't have a rock to stand on. Like when you want to be arguing with somebody on the internet, like most of them do, you have to know, you have to know what you're saying. You can't just blurt out something that you saw on Reddit. Like, you need to understand the historical context of it. But yeah, until Texas officially makes up its mind on what they want us to teach, like, I still kind of just like toe that line of like being very bipartisan in a lot of situations. But our objectives, the way that it is taught as of right now, like on the issue of enslavement, it does show enslavement as, it is something that was negative. It was something that was the cause of the Civil War, according to our objectives. So that's the way it has to be taught. So until that objective is changed, it's going to continue being taught this way. So, but yes, Texas is, it's very difficult to be a history teacher in Texas.
Yeah, I would say I think I have more freedom than Patricia does, obviously, and I think it's I did just get tenure, so I think I could speak more canon. But I would say this makes my job a lot easier. A repository like this, because then it either becomes an issue of curation, where I give them sources to read themselves, or I let them loose through one of the thematic essays, or through those sort of points of entry on the documents themselves, right? So I think whenever we can throw the students into the primary sources, then that kind of diffuses much of this debate. Again, I think this comes around to the point I made earlier about how those sources are contextualized and presented, and I think the team here is doing an exceptional job at through the thematic essay entry point in putting this material out there. So I guess in closing, thank God for things like this, because it makes it a lot easier for us.
I think one thing that's been wonderful, and Sabrina's been working on this, is that all the stakeholders wrote reflective essays, and we asked them to be very deliberate about their situatedness in this process, and thinking about as archivist, as a high school teacher, as a middle school teacher, as a person at a state university, here's where I come to this project, in the hope that other educators will be able to see themselves in that. Michael Medea, who is our fantastic head of education, who is on a much-deserved vacation right now because we also reopened our museum, and that's been crazy, is going to largely have that tab that says education up there. And over the next 5 years, you're going to see a lot of the stakeholders asked to continue to be in conversation with us, but also expanding. So we very much invite anyone who wants to participate in the conversation to be in touch about the types of materials you'd like to see up there. Adriana, I've kept you holding. What do you have?
It's a good segue, because I have some specific questions about current and future resources that you plan to make available via the portal. So one person asking specifically about documentation about Philadelphia neighborhoods and how the names of those neighborhoods originated. Another person is asking about plans about recordings of oral histories, and if that's something in the works. And then it's not a question, but I think it's an interesting suggestion, is do you have plans to create some sort of tutorials, YouTube videos, ways to show people how to navigate, access, and make the best use of the various resources?
The short answer, yes. So that's exactly what should eventually be under either education or some sort of resources tab. Tutorials about how to actually navigate this site. Right now, not that it doesn't look like much, but there's not much to click on. But once we have, these themes, these contextual essays, these primary source sets, I feel like people are going to be overwhelmed, especially students and teachers. So I think having those tutorials, whether it's a YouTube or something like that, where we can actually say, like, this is how we use this, you use it how you would like to. They'll, for the primary source sets, we'll have downloadable PDFs and easy ways to download any of the images as well. I'm also thinking about something that has been on my mind a lot, the materiality of like the material itself. You see a scanned image, you don't really see how big it is. Like, all right, is it this big? Is it the size of the piano? I don't know. So those types of videos I think would be really interesting to show, how, not that they can see it, but, hold it up and show people that this is a real object. It's not just, flat living on the portal. So definitely lots and lots of plans for many, many resources, especially bibliographies, glossaries, not only glossaries about things that are, subjects that, what did I just write? Quartermasters, things like that, but also the metadata itself. What does the field subject mean? What is the field title or, extent? Things like that, I think come second nature to me, but not to everyone that we want to be using this site.
I think as a historian of print, one of the things that I loved in our conversations was how much focus on media and communication was really coming through. That it's very hard for our students who live in a very different world of communication to understand how communication happened. And so conversations about what format means, what size means, what a newspaper looked like, what was a broadside, all of these things, which of course they are standard categories and genres that will be in here, but we need to explain what they are and put them into context. And of course, as we know, there's so many wonderful people working in this field right now who can help us out with this. Well, I want to thank you all very much for being here for our opening for our opening showcase. Thanks to our presenters for coming and sharing their experience.